Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. As you now know, there's a new branch of government in America. It's a fourth branch that has legislative power, even though you never elected them. And it's because they elected themselves. And the new branch's name is the Center for Disease Control. So it's the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and now the public health agency branch. And you didn't vote for this. You didn't consent to it. But this is the new America in which you're living. Among the powers the new fourth branch of government has given itself is the power to say who has to pay rent, who gets stiffed. And two times now, the CDC have gone rogue and simply said, hey, everybody, you don't owe rent anymore. And hey, you middle-class landlords who maybe own a rental property or two, go pound sand. Make your payment to the big banks anyway. And if you go broke, too bad. And you're probably white, rich, and everything else, every other stereotype, which means you didn't earn any of this anyway. Well, except that's not true. See, the CDC discovered that it can go way beyond its mandate. And they do this by ramping up fear and then making policy in the name of safety, whether it actually has anything to do with safety, science, or the law. And now the CDC, that's supposed to be an apolitical taxpayer-funded agency, has clearly been captured by Marxists, and now they want to come after your guns. And they want to do this by declaring that gun violence is a quote-unquote public health emergency, all for the purpose of regulating firearm ownership. Everything can be a public health emergency if you want to control it. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky told CNN just in August that it was time to do something. Watch.
I swore to the president and to this country that I would protect your health. This is clearly one of those moments, one of those issues that is harming America's health. My job is to understand and evaluate the problem, to understand the scope of the problem, to understand why this happens and what are the things that can make it better, to research that, to scale that up, to evaluate it, and to make sure that we can integrate it into communities. We have a lot of work to do in every single one of those areas because we haven't done a lot of work as a nation in almost any of them.
Yeah, guess what their work includes? Yeah, they always say do something, but the something includes funding just pro-gun control studies. Now, the CDC and the National Institutes of Health, they're funding new research on firearms to help, quote-unquote, reduce firearm-related injuries, death, crime, and suicides. And among several other research projects, they're apparently now going to provide funding to 10 state health departments, and they will start collecting data in near real time on emergency room non-fatal firearm injuries. And they say that it will allow doctors and epidemiologists to, quote, identify trends and craft swift interventions. Swift interventions. Remember, this is the science crowd. Now, we all know what they say when they say follow the science, what that means. It means do what we tell you to do. And they appeal to their own authority, so you can't ask questions because they're the CDC. They're not asking, they're issuing an edict. And they use the word science. It's a rubber stamp that otherwise they wouldn't, I mean, really, it's the administration bypassing the legislative branch and doing everything through the CDC because magical public health emergency. That's what's exactly going on. Now, here's the thing, Democrats love to claim that the CDC was barred from research of gun violence by pro-Second Amendment groups. Except this is a lie. They've said this over and over again. I've heard it for the past, 8 years now, except it's a lie. State-run and funded media outlet NPR tweeted out the lie anyway, and they said, quote, for decades, the gun lobby and GOP allies have effectively blocked federal funding for firearm research, creating a tangled mess of unreliable data that obscures the true toll of firearm injuries. And these stories shed light on this. So they did this their whole thing. They set it all up with, so far, the CDC has not at all been able to study anything related to firearms. And this was repeated by a number of Democrats, including Representative Maureen Newman, who also tweeted out the same lie because they apparently have no idea what is law and what isn't. She tweeted, for decades, the gun lobby has prevented the CDC from studying gun violence. Now, under POTUS, we can finally address it for what it is, a public health crisis, end quote. Except it's not, it's a criminal issue, but more on that in a minute. The truth is that the CDC was never barred from researching gun violence in the first place. So back in 1996, during the battle over an omnibus bill, there was a provision that was called the Dickey Amendment that was slipped into this omnibus bill, and it barred the use of taxpayer dollars to advocate for or against gun control. The language was precise. Here's the language. It stated, quote, that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control, end quote. So it's pretty crystal clear, advocate for. It's pretty crystal clear. So what's going on here? The left wants to politicize science and try to restrict firearms using your and my tax dollars to do so. And they want to lie and say they were prohibited from doing so and say that they were barred from researching anything related to firearms. All the law prohibited was using your taxpayer dollars to fund and advocate for gun control. Now, here's the thing. The CDC could have studied something that's actually a little bit, that actually would matter. Like, for instance, the benefits of the family unit and curtailing juvenile crime, or maybe the mental health value of having fathers in the home, but they didn't do any of that. They don't do any of that because that would actually go towards the narrative that they want to work against, which is that matters in the home. No, government raising your kids. Now, here's the thing. They want to use this to restrict your firearms. So in any case, the CDC chose to not conduct at all whatsoever any firearms related studies, and they stifle their own research so as to promote gun control with these pro-gun control studies. They destroyed their own gun control narrative in the 90s, by the way, when they found that lawful defensive gun usage vastly outmeasured criminal usage. And in a recent study from 2008 that was commissioned under Obama-Biden, you know what they found? That almost all national survey estimates indicated that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual usages ranging from about 500,000 to more than 3 million in the context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms in 2008. And this, by the way, was also confirmed by a number of criminal researchers, including some who are not at all Republican or conservative. So the CDC decided to sit on this. They actually, back in the 90s, when they were studying the same thing that challenged the pro-2A and the self-defense narrative, what they actually did was sit on it and they never published it. And they didn't really make a lot of hay out of this either. Now, the CDC doesn't like to report these findings because it contradicts the narrative. Now, remember, the CDC, they're using politics as science, and this is further evidenced by one of their top officials, Mark Rosenberg. He was the director of National Center for Injury Prevention under the CDC at the time. Now he's president and CEO of the Task Force for Global Health. Now, in the 90s, he laid all his cards on the table for his plans to treat guns as a public health crisis. He said, quote, "We need to revolutionize the way that we look at guns, like what we did with cigarettes. It used to be that smoking was a glamour symbol, cool, sexy, and macho, and now it's dirty, deadly, and banned," end quote. They wanted to Joe Camel firearms. I wrote about this in my first book. So the folks on the left, including health agencies like the CDC, they've dreamed of making the Second Amendment a health issue so they can ban it and regulate it like cigarettes, right? You don't have a constitutional right to burying cigarettes. But there's more. When it was discovered that the CDC inflated firearm fatality numbers to boost their narrative, they actually dragged their feet for 2 years before finally correcting it. You're not surprised. I mean, it's the follow the science CDC. They only care about their far-left ideological agendas and how the CDC can advance them. And as you probably know, they were recently caught misrepresenting the child fatality coronavirus rate, and in response, the Wall Street Journal and Johns Hopkins publicly vetted and corrected their figures. The fact is this is all politics. It's not science. But if you can turn the gun debate into a science debate, then you can bring the busybodies over at the CDC in, right? Soon, if they get their way, we could have gloom and doomers like Rochelle Walensky telling us that she has very bad feelings about AR-15s because they look scary, so they should be banned. And as we all know, I mentioned this earlier, the gun violence problem, that's not a health issue. It's a criminal issue. It's an issue of repeat offenders who drive up homicide rates with illegally possessed firearms used in the commission of other crimes. I have spoken about this. I have written about this extensively for years. The simple truth is the CDC wants to step outside of disease control and use its federal authority and abuse it to falsely present a medical need to restrict firearm ownership, just as the CDC involved itself in state-regulated lease agreements for the sake of health. And they have a reason to think that they'll be successful in doing this. The CDC has gotten Americans accustomed to having their natural rights restricted in the name of a false sense of safety. And think about how, in the name of their safety, all of America has literally transformed in the span of what? Just a year? Well, 18 months maybe? Because the safety. The government can inject you against your will. Because of safety, the government can coerce private corporations into taking away your livelihood and ability to feed your children. Because of safety, perfectly healthy young people are treated the same as high-risk people with a number of comorbidities in their 80s until they must take regular injections and wear a mask anytime they're around people. Because of safety, you can't walk into a bar in New York. Safety may also be why, at some point, you can't even get on a plane. Apparently, that's on the table for discussion next. Safety may also be a pretext for tracking your movement and forcing you to show your papers and declare your private health information to total strangers. Point is, With enough fear, safety can be the reason to strip you of all of your liberties. Federal and state governments are corrupting the definition of public health threat as a mechanism to collect more and more power, while people watch their rights disappear. And don't underestimate the power of health agencies to change society while hiding behind the quasi-religious mantra of follow the science. You know how powerful these health agencies are? Not only can they tell people that they don't have to pay their rent, it turns out they can erase women in the name of science. Now, that's real power. Check out a recent tweet and infographic from the Follow the Science CDC. They say, quote, pregnant people with symptomatic COVID have 70% increased risk of death. Pregnant people. Pregnant people. What are pregnant people? It's not a typo. They said it twice. They've said this repeatedly in numerous articles and interviews. Apparently, the Follow the Science CDC doesn't believe that only women get pregnant anymore. Apparently, they believe that men can get pregnant too. Boy, that's going to be a fun conversation. And they wonder why people are tuning them out when it comes to vaccines. I'm not going to listen to anybody tell me anything about a vaccine if you can't even say women. It's all very scientific, you see. CDC is nothing more than an agency of flat-earthing witch doctors who think that women don't exist, that rental agreements are and recidivism are healthcare. They don't actually follow science anymore because they've been captured by the left. Their religion is politics. Defund them. Coming up, you've heard a lot about employees pushing back against vaccine mandates in order to keep their jobs. But what about business owners who don't want to force those employees? Tennessee State Senator and attorney on this issue, Kelsey, joins me next to discuss. Keep it here. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is skyrocketing. Instead of following the previous president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, the current president wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that nobody can pay for. So it's time to take proactive steps and protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals. And Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington keeps printing money to pay for our outrageous bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation, and as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. So the folks at Legacy Precious Metals, that's the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals, and they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful information. LegacyPMInvestments.com. Last year was a tough one for all of us as we were all trying to figure out a world with this coronavirus. Many businesses didn't make it thanks to state lockdowns and government overreach. Well, now those same businesses are faced with another tough choice, more overreach, this time vaccine mandates. So what happens when a business doesn't want to force their employees to get vaccinated against their will? Why does natural immunity never play into this at all? And by the way, who pays for those weekly tests if they don't get the vaccine passport, right? How do they handle exemptions? What about adverse reactions? Tennessee State Senator Kelsey is the managing attorney at the Liberty Justice Center, and they're offering to represent businesses who want to fight these vaccine mandates pro bono. Thank you for being here, Senator. Appreciate your time with us today. There's so many questions. It's so tough to be a small business owner nowadays, and especially now with this mandate. I'll just start with how in the world are they going to actually enforce this? I know they're going to go through OSHA, but how do you check up on something like this?
Well, these are some great questions that you raised, Dana, and thanks so much for having me on. I mean, they're talking about enforcing it with the minimum of $14,000 fines, and then there's even talk that some fines could go as high as, believe it or not, $700,000 per violation. So, I mean, this is just a huge overreach from the federal government to try to impose a COVID-19 vaccine mandate on 100 million Americans. That's 2/3 of our workforce, and we're ready to fight it at Liberty Justice Center.
Yeah, that's a lot of the workforce, and right when businesses actually maybe are kind of starting to get their feet underneath them. Of course, if we don't have more disruptions from supply chains, but this at up to $70,000 to $700,000, and I know that depends on the severity. There's like a graduating scale there. So, what happens if there's an adverse reaction? Because one of the things that we know with vaccines is that they're really, it's very difficult to actually get some kind of restitution for that. There was a law that was modified back in 2015. So how is this handled? I mean, how are they? It seems like it would be easier to do it state by state, but because they chose to make this a federal edict, it's a lot harder. So how does that work if someone does have an adverse reaction because they just wanted to keep food on the table?
Well, there still are a lot of unknown questions out there because the Biden administration announced that this rule is going to go into effect about 3 weeks ago now, but they haven't actually published the rule. And the minute that they do, we are prepared to fight it at Liberty Justice Center and go ahead and challenge that rule in the court system. But we haven't quite seen or heard exactly how this is going to work. I mean, think about it.
That's crazy. I'm not to interrupt you, but that is so crazy. Businesses plan so far in advance for things, and now that they haven't even published the rule.
That's right. They haven't published the rule. It could come down any day, but here's the kicker. It's an emergency rule, so it would take effect immediately, which is why we are ready to spring into action at Liberty Justice Center and challenge it in court. I mean, it really is an outrageous overreach of the federal government. They do not have the authority to mandate vaccines, certainly not to do so through an OSHA emergency workplace rule, which is what they're claiming they're going to try to do.
Yeah, especially when, I mean, there's breakthrough transmissions. I'm just wondering if there is a legal way to, you have false advertising, and I know there's litigation about false advertising and there are protections on that. What about when the federal government, I know we're in totally uncharted territory here, but what about when the federal government is mandating that everyone takes something that they're advertising as something that will transfer to you immunity, which apparently it doesn't because there are still breakthrough transmissions?
Yeah, we've certainly seen that those have taken place across the country for sure and on a regular basis. And that's what this is really comes down to, is that this is a deeply personal health decision that individual Americans need to be grappling with and making on their own. It does not need to be mandated from the top from President Biden. And he knows that he doesn't have the legal authority to do that. And that's why he's trying to backdoor it in through an emergency workplace rule, which is supposed to cover things like toxic spills and things of that nature. It doesn't belong there. The federal government doesn't have this power. And so at Liberty Justice Center, and for those who work for, by the way, who would like to join us, you can visit at libertyjusticecenter.org if you work for a company that has 100 or more employees that does not want to participate, or if you own one. But what we're going to do is we're going to file a lawsuit directly with the Circuit Court of Appeals and ask that this emergency rule immediately be stopped. And that is the goal. And we think that we are on solid legal ground to win that case.
I can't imagine how you wouldn't be at this point, but that seems sort of what the executive branch is kind of looking at, like, well, we're going to let this play out through the legal process, but in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get this pushed while that happens. I don't really think that judges, Brian, really reward the abuse of the process like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've already seen happen in the last few weeks is that the Biden administration is coercing private businesses into making these decisions on their own by threatening this rule and having it hanging out there. And that's right. And courts don't look very highly on such actions. I mean, in fact, emergency OSHA rules in general have fared very poorly. 6 out of the last 9 have been challenged in court and at least partially enjoined. And then also, I mean, the Biden administration itself has got a pretty poor track record at this point. If you think back to when the president was trying to impose an eviction moratorium across the nation, and there the Supreme Court said, no, the federal government does not have the authority to do it.
And it's weird to me too, Brian, that they can mandate this, Senator, that they can mandate this when, for instance, USPS, I think postal workers, there are over 60,000 of them nationally, and they're all exempt, which makes it, to me, it seems like it makes it harder for the administration to argue this point.
Right, that absolutely makes no sense. They are talking about exempting U.S. postal workers, but then they come back and they wanted to apply to federal contractors and subcontractors, and then this is the worst instance of all that we've been talking about, to everyone in America that works for a business with 100 workers or more. And that's just going to have huge ramifications across the economy, across people's personal healthcare lives, because ultimately it's a rule that has nothing to do with the workplace. Which is what OSHA rules are designed to do. This COVID-19 affects you wherever you go, whether you're in the grocery store, picking up your kids, or wherever you are, it affects you. It's not a workplace rule, and that's why the federal government does not have the authority to use OSHA to try to mandate this on Americans.
Isn't it a violation of state sovereignty for the federal government to demand that states not just operate, but also fund federal programs and policies like this? I mean, isn't that like a commandeering clause violation?
There definitely, you're absolutely right, Dana, are states' rights issues that will be brought up. And in fact, we have now 24 attorneys general that have announced that they will be challenging the law as well, and a similar number of governors. But frankly, we think that our claims are stronger on behalf of individual business owners or workers who work at businesses. And so that's why we're encouraging people to go to libertyjusticecenter.org and sign up and let us know your story so that we could potentially represent you for free.
I like your approach to it, Senator. I have to bring up, though, what some of the listeners of my radio program and viewers of this program have been discussing. So what of, and I'm bringing this up because it is kind of interesting. Can someone claim like an ADA issue and say, oh, well, if you force me to get this injection, that's a violation of ADA, and then engage in litigation that way? I mean, what is the potential of something like that?
Well, we have seen that Disabilities Act claims have gone forward. Unfortunately, many of them have gone forward against school districts, for example, that are imposing mask mandates, and so, or those that are not imposing mask mandates. And so I think that there are some claims there that can be brought for sure, but we feel strongest about this particular claim in which we're saying the federal government simply does not have the power under our Constitution to mandate vaccines. Period. It is a government of limited powers. Public health issues are left to states, and they're not left to the federal government, and they're certainly not left to a workplace safety regulation organization.
Yeah, which brings me to my last question for you, Senator. You mentioned states. The federal government can't do this, but states potentially could. What route could states take in order to, I mean, I realize not every governor is going to do this, or every state legislature, but what could certain states do to actually maybe bypass if the federal mandate is tossed out of the court? Some states I would imagine would pick up this slack and try to do it themselves. What could that look like potentially?
I think you're absolutely right about that. If we are able to be successful in stopping the federal rule from going into place, I do think that we'll see many governors who try to push it forward in their own states. But those claims are largely going to turn on individual state laws and even state constitutions, and so we might end up in a situation where we have different outcomes in different states.
Wow, that's going to be fascinating to watch. I'm really looking forward to someone trying to present to you, Senator, in court, how apparently the virus is less contagious if it's a federal worker like Postal Service and more contagious with someone who's in the private sector. I'm just looking forward to that argument being presented in support of that because I feel like that's what else do they have? Senator Brian Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it, Dana.
Of course. All right, coming up, we are constantly told to follow the science when it comes to coronavirus. But how can we do that when the data constantly contradicts itself? Ooh, there's a lot here too, especially, looks like the media is not paying a lot of attention to those decreased rates of hospitalization and transmission in southern states. We'll talk about all of this with Phil Kerpen from American Commitment. He joins me next to break it down. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. They develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus that they learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. So in 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil and then carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther. It's directly sourced from a small farm in Guatemala. So although temperatures are not at all cooling off, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do it is to join that Black Rifle Coffee Club. And when you do, you never have to go to the store for coffee. It's all roasted, packaged, and shipped free right to your porch. And you'll also get special discounts and all other kinds of access. So purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Dana. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. So they say to follow the science, except the science doesn't really match what they're telling you to follow. California just became the first state to require vaccines for students 12 and up the moment it gets FDA approval, but not teachers and faculty. They're okay. Maybe because children aren't in a union that donates to Gavin Newsom's campaign. Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment and joins me now to discuss. Phil, as always, you are a repository of information. We always appreciate your time. I just have to get your thoughts on this situation in California, because it's so the children who are the least affected, and this is the claim that they are not is unsupported, but they're the least affected by the virus. They have to get the vaccinations, but teachers and faculty do not. That doesn't sound like science to me.
Well, it's pretty remarkable, and I think you gave the exact correct explanation. The teachers' union are very powerful politically, and if they've got members that don't want the vaccine for whatever reason, the governor's not going to stand up to them. But children don't have much choice, especially if you note in his announcement, he said public and private school students, it's going to be mandatory. And so the only choice, if you don't want it, I guess, would be to homeschool or to move out of the state. It's very heavy-handed. He did say upon approval, not upon authorization. And so assuming that they do an emergency authorization, which I find odd in itself, given that there doesn't seem to be much of an emergency for children, but it does seem likely the FDA is going to do that. That would not apparently trigger this mandate. It would be the full approval, which probably isn't going to come for some time. But still, it's a pretty clear message from the governor that they're going to require this of children, kind of regardless of what the cost-benefit analysis is, and including if people have, family histories or any specific reason that they wouldn't want their children, that wouldn't make sense for their kids to get. He's going to say, tough, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and no, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see anything mentioned about any kind of natural immunity if you've ever had it before. If you can, why don't they allow measurement of antibodies if people don't want to get vaccinated, as opposed to just having a negative coronavirus test? What about presence of antibodies that would, you could judge whether or not someone would likely get it or be contagious?
Yeah, you would certainly expect. If we were treating this the way we treated any infectious disease in the past, that documentation of prior infection and current immunity would be sufficient to meet any vaccine requirement. That's always how it's been. Basically, for every disease that's ever had a vaccine required, there's been an alternative of show that you've got immunity from prior infection, but almost nowhere is doing that with this coronavirus. And I think that a decision's been made from someone in the high command brain trust, Fauci or Walensky or whoever, that if you recognize the obvious, which is that there's very strong protection with prior infection with natural immunity, that will somehow incentivize people to go out and get infected on purpose. And I just think that's a total nonsense idea. Something around half the country has already had this virus. And, we're not talking about the incentives or anything else. We're talking about for that enormous number of people, are you going to require them to get a vaccine anyway that has far, far less benefit because they already have immunity, but may have the same or even greater risk of adverse event? And so I think that we've got to have recognition of natural immunity. And I think, Dana, that the refusal of the powers that be to recognize the obvious, which is that people who've already had COVID have immunity, has really undermined the trust and the confidence in everything that comes out of their mouths. And I don't think they appreciate how much damage they've done to themselves and to their entire public health effort with that denial.
Now, that's a great point as well. And the whole noble lies phenomenon with Fauci and some of these others, I think that I understand their perspective, that if they gave some nuance, or if they try to give people options, that people maybe perhaps would be less inclined to go and get it, and it would undermine the importance of what they were trying to do. But the way that they've handled this has just done so much damage, and just not being forthright with people, not saying, you know what, we didn't anticipate these mutations to happen as quickly as they did. We don't have any genetic sequencing for any other kind of injection that would handle this particular variant. So this is where we are. This is what, make your own best decision. They didn't do that. It blows my mind.
Thing is they do have Delta specific boosters from all the major manufacturers that are in trials, but for whatever reason, they've shown almost no urgency, and they've nothing like President Trump's warp speed approach in trying to get those, tested and proven safe and ready quickly. Instead, they're just saying, essentially take another dose of last year's vaccine, which I find very strange.
Yeah, you don't do that with flu shot.
Right.
That's just so wild. Okay, so one of the other things that everyone's starting to discuss now is we're going into fall. We're in pumpkin spice season. We're full on into that. And to their credit, the New York Times every now and then they have some genuinely good reporting. Of course, that's often balanced by horrible reporting. But they were discussing some of the hospitalization rates and transmissions for southern states that have really taken a beating in the press and by this administration in the past year. And interesting how Florida was just at the bottom of this list and still decreasing. In fact, all of these, and you've noted this too, a number of southern states, warmer areas, their rates are starting to decrease. Is that, and it seems oversimplified almost to say that it is just something as basic as seasonal changes. Now that it's getting cooler out, people in southern states are going to go outside. It's getting colder up north, so they might be more inclined to spend time indoors. Is it really just as basic as that?
Well, we've got a pretty clear seasonal pattern now. We've seen it through a couple of years. The southern areas definitely get it earlier. Last year, they got it in basically June and July. This year, they got it in kind of August and September. And then the northern states get it later. And it's not the exact same days that they got it last year, but the sequence is kind of the same. And so it's fair to assume that there's some sort of seasonal factor in play, whether that's something related to something related to the amount of solar radiation that there is, or whether it's something to do with the way that the weather affects the transmission dynamics of the virus itself, or whether it's just human behavior, the point that you just made, which is the outdoor season in the South is not the summer because it's too hot to be outside, and that may be why they have more transmission indoors than in the North. I don't think we really know the relative contribution of the kind of factors that cause the seasonal pattern, but we do know that the seasonal pattern is real and exists, and to a certain extent it reflects the seasonal pattern that we've seen with influenza and other respiratory viruses in the past. In fact, there's a very famous scientist named Edgar Hope Simpson, who did a study in the 1970s that looked at the flu transmission globally every single year, and he sort of put together what the seasonal patterns looked like, and he found that there was a very different pattern in the northern temperate region than there was in sort of the tropical and subtropical region, and he thought the dividing line was at about 30 degrees north. And if you look at what we've seen with COVID, it looks like the dividing line is about 37 degrees north. So maybe the world has changed. Maybe COVID's a little different in terms of its geography than flu. But it's really interesting to me that the observations from many decades ago with flu seem to have relevance to what we're seeing with COVID now in terms of the difference in the seasonality according to latitude.
Yeah, and that, of course, the seasonality. I mean, this is at this point it's endemic. I'm not quite sure if I feel like our health agencies know this, but wouldn't it be so much more helpful if they just admitted it to everybody and just were so that we could maybe better perhaps plan or strategize?
Well, I think the southern states have generally reached endemicity, and most of them are in the high 60s to say even the low 70s, the percentage of the population that's ever had it. So they're pretty well up there in terms of those numbers. Some of the northern states may have one more epidemic left, unfortunately, Dana.
Oh, wow.
We may have another epidemic wave here over the next few months in some of these northern states. But I do think that if that happens, that may be it for them, or it may not. It really depends, I think, on how far into the population they are, and that varies by area. And so it's not going to be endemic everywhere all at once. It's going to depend on sort of reaching whatever the number is in the population. We don't really know what that is. I will say that India and Nepal had something very, very interesting happen that has not happened in the rest of the world yet, which is that influenza is back. And I think that might be sort of nature's best indicator of when you really are through the epidemic phase with COVID, is when it sort of seeds ground back to our old friend influenza, and that comes back. We're not seeing that yet in the U.S. I think we may see it in some areas this year. We may not see it all. I don't know, but I think that's when we'll really know that the epidemic is over.
Yeah, I feel like this week that there were two big narratives that have kind of taken a hit. With regards to this, with the virus and the behavior of it, is the masking with kids and as well as these numbers with the southern states, because the media wanted to present that the more, I guess you want to say, lax restrictions or absent any restrictions, that somehow contributed to higher rates, et cetera. But we're not seeing that with some of these states, with these southern states. So it really does feel like that narrative really took a hit, because now I don't see any headlines. We have a mutual friend, Jim Garrity. He wrote about this. The media is not really saying anything about the ongoing decrease in hospitalization rates, et cetera, and also severity of symptom. They're not writing anything about that at all, which I think would be incredibly helpful for people to know if we're going to follow the science, Phil.
Well, we've seen this pattern an awful lot too, Dana, which is, in the states where they want to make the governors heroes, and it's, Cuomo and Pritzker and whoever, and Newsom, on the way up the curve, they frame it as the heroic fight of the governor against the disease, and he's trying so hard and it's not his fault that it's rising. And then on the way down the curve, they give them full credit. It's because they put the mask in, it's because they shut down restaurants, it's because of whatever intervention they did. They credit the declining curve to that in those states. And then in the states with conservative governors that have resisted a lot of those measures, they get attacked. And every day on the way up the curve, they get blamed for every single death. And then when the curve does exactly the same thing, it reaches its peak and it declines in a symmetrical fashion to how it rose. The national media doesn't even cover it. The local media has to begrudgingly, but the national media just ignores it. And so, unless you're really looking for it and seeking it out and reading places like National Review, and I guess that one article at the New York Times, if you get your news from TV news, you don't know that Florida crashed. You don't know. They didn't tell you.
Yeah. That's science. That's our new science. Phil Kerpen, always a pleasure. So appreciate your expertise on this. Thank you so much for giving us some time today.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. All right, folks, the persecution of people who dissent with leadership, particularly now military leadership. It's a nuanced issue, but it's incredibly concerning. And now, apparently, who watches the Watchmen? You can't even ask that. We're going to talk all about that with this really, really heart-wrenching case up next. Stay with us. How much equity do you have in your home? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity you have, the greater the chance that criminals could target you. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, according to cybercrime experts. And Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protections, warning folks that they could potentially be victims and not know it. Cyber thieves can search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. They can find your home's online title, forge your signature stating that you sold your home, and take out loans using your equity. So insurance or common identity theft programs are not going to cover you. Protect your most valuable asset and register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim. And you can also get a complete title history of your home, a $100 value for free. Visit HometitleLock.com. So as you know, everything is politicized now, everything, even our military. In fact, for the first time I can remember, the heads, the military leadership, they seem to be actively purging the armed forces of anybody, maybe who voted for Trump, who seems conservative. They call these people far-right extremists and say that they're a threat to the country, which might be why they're throwing the book at two soldiers in particular. So the first soldier is a Marine, Lance Corporal Hunter Clark. Now, you may not recognize the name, but I know you are aware of his heroism in Afghanistan and just how sweet a soul he seems to be. When the Kabul airport was overwhelmed with desperate people trying to get out, some women handed their babies to American soldiers, hoping that their children could at least escape the Taliban and make it to America. And Lance Corporal Hunter Clark, he was one of those soldiers standing there on the wall who heroically pulled one such baby to safety over the barbed wire, and that baby was reunited with their family. He did that because that's what our Marines do, right? Well, now Lance Corporal Hunter Clark is being investigated by the same military he dutifully served, even though they completely botched the withdrawal of Afghanistan and put him and others in harm's way unnecessarily. And his crime was that he went on stage on his own private time with Donald Trump at a rally in Georgia, and he thanked people for supporting him. He wasn't there in uniform. He didn't tell anybody to go vote for anybody. He didn't even say go vote at all. He just said thanks. Now he's being investigated simply because he was there. It is completely unclear what, if any, rules that he broke at all by going up on stage during a Trump rally, but we all know why he's being investigated. Another Marine, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, he's in the brig. He's in solitary confinement in a military prison. And the reason is because he posted some criticism on Facebook, videos, a video that went viral, and it questioned the way that his commanders chose to withdraw from Afghanistan. And Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller could not stay silent after 13 U.S. service members were unnecessarily killed. So he spoke up, and he knew full well it would cost him. He knew full well that he was criticizing military leadership, which is not allowed, but he also knew full well that he was responsible for a number of lives underneath him. He's not a subordinate, but he's not one of the top officers, but he is a lieutenant colonel, and he has people who depend on him. And so he gave up his pension after 17 years in the infantry. Now, it's like I said, he broke chain of command. But I seem to recall someone else who broke chain of command, but he's not in solitary confinement. That's Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Miley. You see, the rules apparently are just for average Americans, like Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. His parents joined me on my radio program this afternoon, and this is what they had to say about their son. Watch.
Well, we just heard that the military on Tuesday was going to work with our son and try to come up with an arrangement.
A settlement, separation.
And as of today, they've decided to bring down the full force of the military to try to never let him out.
We just heard this from Representative from Texas, Louis Gohmert. So the roller coaster continues. Last night we were encouraged. We told Americans that we were encouraged, but to keep up the pressure on their congressman and keep praying. But just now I got off the phone with Representative Louis Gohmert, who said that there has been in the last day or the last hours a change of heart from the Secretary of Navy and the generals of the Marine Corps that they want to crush our son.
Wow. Wow.
And they do not have the same rules in the military court as we do in regular court. They do not have to let us see him. They do not have to let us speak to him. They do not have to do regular due process.
They do not have to let him bring in character witnesses. The judge, the general of Camp Lejeune presides over the judge. The judge chooses the jury.
And he's not to have witnesses.
It needs reform, and I'm not an expert on the military judicial system. I'm an expert on my son.
He did a Facebook post.
They need a scapegoat for their obvious mistakes. They're arrogant, they're mean, they play nasty, and it's an outrage. And
they want to make sure that no other military person speaks out by making an example of our son.
We have gained traction in the last 5 days since we've asked Americans to find their voice and step up. It's Friday. I'm asking Americans, this could be an ultramarathon. Please continue. Contact your Congress people. Continue the pressure. It's not just for Stuart. It's for America. It's for you. It's for your family. We're fighting for liberty.
We're leaving tomorrow morning to head to North Carolina, and we do not want any kind of rioting. We want peacefulness, but we want people to write their congressperson and their representative, and we would like people to show up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and let them just see how many people are saying, let him go.
His legal counsel has asked for an open hearing. You would think that would be fair, or at least to have his parents at his trial. Representative Louis Gohmert, who has stepped up in this process the last few days, I was just on the phone with him, and he has committed to try to get Kathy and I into the proceedings. Yes. I hope he's successful. We'd like to see our son.
And we do not want rioting. We do not want violence. We want a peace, Martin Luther King style, peaceful love. We just want them to see our show of force.
Now, your son, we're talking to the Schellers, their son, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, who is in the brig. He's been incarcerated by USMC. You released a statement saying that the command seems to be concerned, but they don't have the tools to support him at this time. Incarceration appears to be their only solution. And you said in 30 days, our son went from being an exemplary Marine, handpicked by the Corps and placed in a highly prestigious position as the commander of the Advanced Infantry Training Battalion, to a Marine who is now incarcerated for demanding accountability and integrity from military leadership. You clearly see that there's a double standard in how your son is treated and military leadership, especially in the wake of the 13 service members' deaths.
Yes.
No question.
Hypocrisy.
We don't just see it. We have received tens of thousands of emails, text messages, phone calls. America sees it.
And those same generals that did that are in charge of our son's life.
That's
Keep that in mind.
yes.
How would you feel if that was your son, America? He
Exactly.
is your son. He is your patriot. He is your hero. Stand up for him, please.
It really hit home when his dad said, "He is your son, America." You can watch that whole interview over on YouTube or on my Facebook page, Official Dana Lash on Facebook. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.